All right, I see that YouTube is live and LinkedIn should be following shortly. So for the sake of time, it is 1:01 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central, and so we will get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a live stream of the Aging Together podcast, season 4, sponsored by Heart Mobility, revolutionizing those steel metal gray grab bars from the 1960s with their newest product, Safety Grip. If you're tuning in live, please use the chat to introduce yourselves and ask any questions along the way. Our guest today will answer them at the end of the show. So today's guest is Alison Pena. Alison Pena, aka Bad Widow, is a New York City-based grief resilience coach, speaker, and best-selling author of The Bad Widow Guide to Life After Loss: Moving Through Grief to Live and Love Again. She became a primary caregiver during her husband's battle with cancer and a widow when David died in 2016. She left his mother, Joyce, to care for since he was an only child. Alison has been her primary caregiver for the last 9 years, keeping her safe and loved at home until just before her 102nd birthday recently. Each phase of Joyce's increasing health issues brought new challenges that they faced together. Everyone grieves someone or something. That makes grief resilience a life skill. Alison developed Life After Grief Blueprint coaching for her bereaved clients with time-tested ways from her own experience to reconnect with themselves, re-engage in the world, reinvent their identities, rebuild their networks, and reset their paths forward. Alison, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Pooja.
There's a lot to unpack here, and I want to make sure we can get to as much of it as possible. How about we start from the beginning? What's your story and your journey as a caregiver?
My husband, we got married. I've been a caregiver a long time. 6 weeks before I got married, we found out that he was bipolar, and I married him anyway. In the course of our marriage, we were together for 25 years, he got diabetes and then he got stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed in 2015 and he lived 11 months. And what we decided to do, which was longer than we expected. When you get the diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, they basically say, prepare to die. If your will is not in order, go to a lawyer. So it's absolutely terrifying. And we decided that we could either prepare to die or live until he did. Because people say to each other, what would you do if tomorrow was the last day of your life? And with this diagnosis, there was going to be a day which was the last day of his life and the last day of our lives together. For real. And so it became not a fiction and not a theory, but a way of living. And honestly, if we had lived that way throughout our marriage, we would have had a very different marriage. Because one of the things that this kind of crisis brings up is what really matters. So what mattered was our love. What mattered was the people and the things that we were passionate about. And so we started reprioritizing. We cut out the things that didn't matter and we elevated the things that did. And that's how we lived for 11 months. And then he died. I fought for him to die at home, and he did. He died in my arms, just the two of us at home. And as he was dying, he said to me, well, what about my studio? He was an artist. He left me over 500 paintings. What about my mom? What about you? And I just kept saying, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it. And I was holding him and the tears were falling down my face and I was trying not to let them hit his chest. And so I said to him, in a body you need breath and love. When you leave your body, all you need is love. So whenever you're ready, go out on the love. And he literally took 4 breaths and did. And you can prepare for some things. You can get the will. You can talk about what's expected, what the person how the person wants you to live afterwards. You can't actually prepare for something like that. For losing a person you've been with for 25 years. It's like losing a limb.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't actually know what it's going to be like until it happens. And so I was a coach who couldn't connect with people. I could barely call somebody back. I couldn't remember to eat. I once went a block and a half in my slippers to an appointment, and I only realized that I didn't have shoes on because my heels were cold. So there are all these small practical things that there's no way to prepare for, and that make you wonder who you are, because the competent, effective person that I was before my husband died suddenly vanished. So I couldn't trust my body. I couldn't trust my mind. I couldn't focus. I couldn't finish projects. I was completely dusted. And in the face of that kind of indecisiveness that happens for many, many people after somebody dies, other people stepped in and tried to make decisions for me. Well, you should do this. You must do that. You must move to a different apartment. You should start dating. And so there are incredible boundary jumping conversations that you have with people as they decide what they think would be best for you without asking. And so I started to really identify what mattered to me, because what had risen up as David was dying was what I cared about. And I started saying no. So one of the first things I did was I began to develop boundaries, and I began to create clear methods of communication. Because what I realized is that nobody knew how to deal with me. I mean, people are kind, but they just have no idea. And the boundary jumping and he's asking to come over. So one of the things that happened as he was dying was he asked me to take care of his mom. And his mom and I had a rough relationship. We were always competing for his time and attention, because he was 35 when we got married. She was accustomed to having him all to herself, and she did not like my presence in his life. And here he's entrusting her to me. And I didn't think she was in her 90s. I didn't think it would be very long. And it's been very long. But in the course of these last 9 years, we've gone from really resentful, angry, contentious relationship to a very loving one. Bad widow. So a bad widow was kind of something I named myself, because people kept telling me, what I should do, how I should feel, how I should speak, what activities I should be doing, where I should be living. And at a certain point, I said no, because very often when you're grieving, people say, "How are you?" and you go, "Fine, I'm fine," because you don't want to put people out, make them uncomfortable, and people are very uncomfortable around grief and death. And I started taking a different tack. So I would actually say what was true. But because I realized that they didn't know what to do or say, I started just being very clear. Going to a holiday like Thanksgiving shortly after he died. He died in September. So Thanksgiving was November. That was 2 months. That's like a breath when you're grieving. I called up the host and I said, I'm very excited to come and see people, but I don't know how I'm going to be. So what I want you to know is I'm okay. If I get emotional and I start to cry, I'm okay. If I need to leave early, I'm okay. I don't want you to be offended, but I want you to know how I am and what I'm going to need while I'm there to be comfortable. And one of the best things I did was I asked to sit at the children's table. I could do kids' problems. So there were like very small specific things that I began to build out to navigate my way through the world and have people understand that I was heartbroken, but I wasn't broken. I can't hear you. Sorry. Okay. Can you hear me?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. But I was just saying that love how you were able to find small opportunities to make it more bearable for you in the immediate aftermath of your husband dying. I think what you mentioned earlier is that nobody wants to talk about dying and grief and all of that, right? We all die, everyone dies, but people don't like to talk about it. And generally in society, people don't know how to respond to people when they're grieving, or how to help, or what to say or what not to say. And I feel that it's an area that it's unfortunate how how hush hush it is a lot of times, right? People grieve in their own way, on their own terms, in their own space, and don't necessarily share it. So then people don't know what to expect when it's their turn, right? And granted, it's different from person to person, but little nuggets here and there are likely relatable to most people. So your husband died, and then was his mom needing help immediately, or how did that process go? Like what happened after he died, and then with you and his mom?
No, she didn't need help immediately. She was, bopping around the city on her own. She's a very independent woman. Into her early 90s, she was an usher at Wicked on Broadway
Wow,
for years, for
that's
decades.
awesome.
Yeah. And so she loved being active and being out. And one of the really hardest things for her has been the limiting of her capacity. As she got older, as she was less able, she couldn't safely go out on her own. But it was about 3 years before it became necessary for me to start to step in a bit more. And it was, she had moved the rent invoice around her apartment. And I only discovered it when she was 3 days from being evicted. And so at that point, I needed to really step in and be much more proactive about helping her handle her finances. But because I wanted her to feel like she had a say and was participating, I had her sign her rent checks, up to her last rent check at 101. She was signing her own rent checks. And I would fill the whole thing out because that wasn't really possible, but so that she would feel like this is her life and her world and she has some level of autonomy. But as time went on, I needed to take over more things. I talked her into getting a med alert so that when she fell, she could press a button and get a lift assist. And she really has been very lucky. She hasn't fallen a lot until 2025. But what she could do has diminished over those years, especially over those last 6 years. So it came down to, making sure that she had diapers and getting groceries and curating friends to make sure that friends showed up for her. Scheduling them, calling them, telling them to show up. So there are all these things that you don't really think about when you're able-bodied and you're relatively young. You don't think about calling a friend and going out to get a bite to eat, but if you're in a wheelchair, you have to. As her energy, waned or was good in a given day, she might play the piano for me for several hours. She went into the nursing home a week before her 102nd birthday on April 29th. But on April 15th, she was playing the piano in her apartment. I had brought her home from rehab. This is a story I told you. I had brought her home from rehab, and I brought her home against medical authority. So what that means is that they say that she's not ready to come home. But I watched her spirit sort of draining out of her in that place. And I made the decision, I'm her healthcare proxy, to bring her home because it was becoming pretty clear that a nursing home was in her future, even though I didn't want that. But in 2025, she fell every month. Every month. And she really hadn't before. All the years before, she would fall and need a lift assist back into bed or a chair. But she wouldn't fall and go into the hospital. She never broke bones. We were lucky that way. And so I brought her home and I got a bed rail, like an infant bed rail, which went the entire length of the side of the bed. And I left the bottom open because, she was barely moving in the rehab. And the first day I came in and she was sitting on the piano bench playing the piano. And she had crawled out the bottom of the bed. And she said, Alison, that was really difficult. I didn't like that at all.
Yeah, I bet. Not as easy as getting up off the side, huh?
No, of course not. And I kind of had a choice. So I could have gotten another grab bar and put it along the end of the bed. And it would have been safer for her. And it would have crushed her spirit a little bit more. And so what I decided to do was, if she had the energy to crawl out the bottom of the bed, I would do everything I could to keep her safe, but I wouldn't trap her in there.
Yeah.
And me and one other person were coming every day. If she had just stayed in the bed, she would have been perfectly safe from falling. Almost every day she crawled out the bottom of that bed. And so I put a chair and her walker so that she could get up and walk around, or she could stop and rest. And she would get up, go get ice cream in the fridge. I kept it stocked, walk over, play the piano, go to the commode, go watch TV. And I bought her almost another month in her home before she fell again. And this time when she went into the hospital, she actually wasn't hurt, and I could have brought her home. But if I had brought her home, we would have been there again in 2 or 3 weeks. And so we were in the hospital she was in the hospital in the ER without a bed for 27 hours. I was with her for 15 of those hours. And then I told them that she needed to go into a nursing home. And all she wanted to do was go home. And almost every day she asked me when she could go home. And her memory is quite good, actually, probably about at 60%. But she would forget, and then I would have to break her heart again and again. And I chose a nursing home up near me so that I could see her a lot. And we were in the ambulance going up there, and she said, "How could you do this to me?" And my heart just broke. It was a week before her 102nd birthday. And so I went and I got balloons. Huge, 102, happy birthday. And her room was filled with balloons. And I arranged for friends to come up. And I got her red velvet and carrot cake cupcakes. Because what I know is it's the tiny things that matter.
Yeah.
And I'm not worried about her falling, but I'm worried about her only interacting with old people. She said, "Everybody here is old." I'm like, "Yeah, that's why I keep arranging visitors." So there are different concerns, like how they'll make sure she's changed and they'll make sure she eats. So this vacation, I'm in Maine at the moment, is the first one where I haven't had to worry about chasing down the EMTs if she fell and the med alert went off. I mean, I've actually been able to sleep for the first time in 6 years on vacation.
Yeah. That's huge.
But her friends come and visit. People like her there. She doesn't ask that often when she's going to go home anymore. But it breaks my heart every time she does. And she's near. She's about 10-minute walk from where I live.
Oh,
So
wow.
I go and see her 3 or 4 times a week. But I can go for an hour. Her apartment was an hour away. And then once she was in the nursing home, I had to close out her apartment that she lived in for 60 years. And that was its own kind of heartbreak,
Yeah.
because memories of my husband, memories of her, like, it was devastating. And I just wanted to get through it as fast as they're gone.
Yeah, that's a really That's a lot to go through at once, especially when someone has spent almost their entire lives in one spot, right? Downsizing is one thing, but when you have to clear out an entire home that, your husband grew up in after
Yeah.
your husband passed away because his mom can no longer stay there, that's just a lot of emotions at once. You've touched on so many emotions throughout this journey, and I just want to talk a little bit about that transition from your very tricky emotional relationship with your mother-in-law to how it evolved into today where, it breaks your heart when she asks you these questions and you have so much empathy for her and love and care and support for her. How did that transition occur? And I know you mentioned it was slow and over time, but how did that evolve?
When David died, he was furious. Even though his skin was just stretched tight to his bones by the time he died, I mean, he was literally scared the last 10 days. He said to me, "You never told me he was going to die." And it honestly didn't occur to me because look at him. I said, there were oxygen tanks in the living room. And so she was really angry. The other thing that was contentious was that my husband was an artist. So he left over 500 paintings. He left a studio. And so I needed to clear out his studio because beyond a certain point, I couldn't pay for the studio. But when I didn't exist, he was leaving his paintings to his mom. And so she said, "Well, I was meant to get the paintings. You weren't meant to get the paintings." And I said, "We were together for 25 years. We were married for 20 years." "Oh, that's a long time." I'm like, "Yeah, it's a long time."
Easy
And
to
so
forget, huh?
right, exactly. And so she would go into the studio and take paintings out some level that I could have done something to keep him from dying. And basically the reason for it, so with a caregiver, especially a family caregiver, that's the person who's not going to leave. And I think that's really important for your listeners to realize is that I took a lot of anger because I wasn't the one who was going to leave. And she and I had battles. When I tried to find someone who would help, a subsidized caregiver who could help me with her, the nurse came to ask the questions. She said, "I'm not answering those." And she threw us both out of her apartment. With the subsidization, the caregiver was going to be $6 an hour.
Wow.
And by the end, what I wound up finding, which was a great solution, the person we found has been amazing, was $25 an hour. And so what that meant was that her assets went through faster because she threw out that nurse when I could have had an alternative. So it's been this real balance between how do I give her as much autonomy as I can and keep her safe. Because what she thinks of herself as she was. So she realizes with her head that her capacity is not what it was. She can't walk around the way she did. She can't, we were in the ER for the 27 hours. I was there for 15. She's like, I don't have to stay. I can just walk out of here. And I thought, not without me.
Yeah.
But that was a real, as her limitations smacked her in the face, that was really hard for both of us.
Yeah.
And she was
Does
worried I would
she-
leave.
Oh. So she did have an eventual realization that she needed you.
Yes. Yes. But so one of the things that was hardest, if you think about her, she's 102. And she's always been active and involved and helping others and all of that. And suddenly she's the one who has to be helped. And she has no choice about it.
Yeah.
And that piece has been really, really, really hard for her because she thinks that she has to do stuff to be loved. And she says, why are you doing this for me? And I said, because I love you. She said, anything I can do for you. And the fact of the matter is there's very little that she can do for me at this point. Aside from, keep herself well and be willing to do PT or whatever. Mm-hmm. But in the generousness that she was, that's no longer possible for her. And that's been the worst. And so she's really raged at me about that.
It's the loss of independence, right?
Mm-hmm. And the loss of identity. Mm-hmm. Like, who is she if she can't do all the things that she could do?
Yeah.
What gives her life meaning? And so we have a ritual, which I do. So I take her used to take her to get pedicures, but I give her home manicures myself. And so I would get a little bucket full of water and put some soap in it so she can soak her hands like a manicurist. Then I would take each hand and I would clip the nails, and then I would have her check them. Check my work. Okay, are these okay? And she would go through and nope, this one is not good. You need to fix this edge. And I would go, okay, let me take it and do a little more work on it. And it's a really small thing, but it's kind of a mutually loving act.
Yeah. It offers connection.
Mm-hmm. And I still do that in the nursing home, even though there are people who could do it, because it's not about the manicure.
Right. It's about that time and that connection and that routine that you've created to show her that you're still there.
If you're focused, it doesn't take as much time. Mm-hmm. So I used to go and take care of her, and I would be all about clean the commode and get her food and this and that and the other thing, racing around her apartment to get all the stuff done. And she was not satisfied, and I was not satisfied. And then what I started to do was I started to do what must get done, but there were things that if the laundry didn't get done that day, so be it.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
And just sit and sing a song with her, or listen to her play the piano and clap wildly, And then she didn't require as much time from me because she was getting the visceral connection. We both had evidence of love. And it was much more satisfying. And I guess I learned that in the last 3 years.
I always like to tell family caregivers too who have, loved ones in assisted living or memory care or even at home, outsource the stuff that needs to get done that you don't need to do, right? If you have access to those services through your insurance or through the community, or if you can afford to pay for it, get rid of all the stuff that needs to get done so that you can spend your time spending time with your loved one and not doing all the tasks that need to get done, right? It's like, okay, I'll take care of everything. But at the end of the day, like you said, you weren't satisfied. She wasn't satisfied because at the end of the day, we just want connection. We want quality time together. And when you're running around trying to get stuff done and she can't help you and participate in it with you, then ultimately she's just watching you running around doing it. And she doesn't feel good about it, right? And you're tired, right? And then you don't get to spend that time with her either. And so it leaves room for, like you mentioned earlier, that loss of purpose, the loss of connection, all of that stuff. Speaking of identity and role loss, shifting gears a little into the family caregiver side, some of the work I do is helping family caregivers move on after their caregiving role ends, right? And this is something that you do as a grief resilience coach, helping people move past their grief or through their grief and to redefine what their life and purpose look like after their role is done. Some family caregivers hold these roles for 5 to 6 years. Some hold them for 15 to 20 years. And in that process, they've lost their own sense of identity and purpose because their caregiver role became their entire identity and purpose. Because we have to remember, being a family caregiver is a 24/7 job. It's not a job that you go into and clock in for 8 hours and leave, right? It is around the clock. It is constant through weekends, through holidays, through, good and bad. And so that becomes such an integral part of their life that when that role ends, they don't know what to do with themselves, right? And that leads to a lot of depression and a lot of other stuff along the line from a mental health standpoint, and the loss of social relationships. There's a lot there. And so trying to help people move on from that perspective. So tell us a little bit about how you tackled that, or how you're tackling it now that she's in a nursing home and not in your home, and how that transition has been, and then sort of how you're preparing for transitioning back into your own life and purpose, once she does pass.
Yeah. When I moved her from her apartment, so her apartment was an hour away, so it would be a 2-hour round trip to her. If I spent 3 hours there, that's 5 hours or 7 hours, depending on what I was doing. And so that was a huge bite out of my life that has affected the kinds of work I can do, the kinds of activities I can accept, the invitations. I have, for the most part, not gone away, aside from 2 weeks a year for 6 years, because I couldn't. So her moving into a nursing home has given me back between 5 and 8 hours a day. And it's been really interesting because there's a little bit, what do I do with myself? So much time. And what I have come to is that I'm very mindfully putting activities and work back into my life, because caregiving it's a load. It's heavy work at times. And I'm so accustomed to it that I need to be very careful not to take on equally heavy work, because that's my comfort zone. And so I've been watching what I do and what I add into my life, and I'm adding things very slowly. The kind of work I do, I have bought sunflowers for our little backyard and bee feeders. And in the morning, I go and I sit outside and I listen to street sounds. I'm in New York City, and I watch the birds to get myself back in my body before I start my day, to make choices that aren't so hard just because it's comfortable. And so that's what I'm doing bit by bit. You know, I still have time that I need to spend with her. It's just less time.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, one of the things that I had to do before I went to Maine for this vacation was I had to go to a funeral parlor, because if she was to die in these 2 weeks, I need to make sure that she's taken care of. And it was pretty freaking awful. It was honestly awful to go and to plan for that. Because if they were to call me and say that she had died and she is 102, I would need to have that taken care of. After she passes away, I will be losing her and my husband again.
Yeah.
My last tie to him. And what I know is that I can prepare, like I've done this rodeo before. So I can prepare to a degree in a way that I couldn't imagine before. But I won't be able to do all of it. You know, I can do as much as I do, and I will still be blindsided. This is what I know.
Right.
But I'm a bad widow. So I will find my way. You know, this is what I did for myself. This is what I do for my clients. I look at what are the breakdowns that are happening from the grief. What are the relationships I'm losing? What is the work that I'm struggling to do? What are the activities that I'm shying away from? And then I make decisions about whether I want those things in my life or not. When my husband died, I used to love to go and do open mics, and he did not love that. And so gradually I gave it up. And after he died, I took it back. And there are probably things like that that will happen again. So you can prepare to a degree, and then you get blindsided, and you deal, you know, as best you can. It's different for everybody.
Yeah. You can't prepare for when you get that phone call, where you'll be, what you're going to be doing, what you're in the middle of, right? What emotions you'll feel at that time. You might have an idea of how you're going to feel, but until you get that call, you're not going to know. And that is really hard. I want to give us some time for you to talk about what you do and how you help other family caregivers navigate grief and grief resilience, and maybe even talk about how you define grief resilience, because I don't know that it's a term that everybody is aware of. You know, we talk a lot about grief counseling, grief support, but you specifically are a grief resilience coach. And so what does that mean to you, and what do you do? How do you help?
Yeah, what that means to me is that there's when you lose someone, or when you're caregiving. So caregiving itself, before you lose the person, is a lot of anticipatory grief. So you're trying to prepare. When David was sick, I was trying to prepare. As Joy's getting older, I'm trying to prepare. What I discovered is that there are 5 sort of passages that people go through when they're grieving. There's reconnect with yourself. And this is what you were just talking about. Who am I if I'm not a caregiver? How do I figure that out when I'm just adrift? The second is to re-engage in the world. When we're hurt, we contract. When we're grieving, we contract. And it doesn't automatically happen that you reach out again. That's an actual action. Third is reinvent yourself. Your identity as a caregiver, once that's gone, you have to figure out who you are now. Fourth is rebuild networks. So our networks of support very often change when we're caregiving or when we're grieving, when we're bereaved. And what happens is that, first of all, there are the people who are uncomfortable with death, with grief, with caregiving, with all of that. They are going to go away, probably. They'll step out of your life. And so a friend of mine said that some of the C people stepped up and the A people left. And one of the biggest things that people complain about is being abandoned. Because grief is very much misunderstood. Mm-hmm. Caregiving is very much misunderstood. It's a seismic shift in who you are. And so rebuilding your networks is, first of all, who's staying, who's going, who's stepping into the breach. And then there's who do you need in this new life? So I didn't, when my husband died, have anyone to go to open mics with. But I found somebody. And so there are new people that might need to rise up in the face of what you want to be doing now. And then reset your path forward. For almost every person who's a caregiver or who's a caregiver who then is the worst. When my husband died, that was the worst thing that could possibly have happened to me. I had vast holes in my life. And so then once he had died, there was nothing worse that could happen. And so then I started being much more forthright about what I wanted. Bad widow. No. You say I should do this, and I know in my heart that that is the wrong thing for me to do. I'm not doing it. And I don't actually care that you think it would be better for me. And so for almost every person that I work with, they come very often to this place where they are so clear about what actions, what activities, what relationships are true to themselves, and they are unwilling to compromise on it. So I work typically with people who have reached the tipping point. So they have hit a place where they realize that they will never be the person that they were before. Mm-hmm. Grief, bereavement, caregiving, they change you. And so the first sort of set of feelings is, I want what I had before. I want to feel that way. I want to be that person. And so the tipping point is where you realize that that is no longer possible. That's where I typically start working with people. Because until you stop looking back, you can't go forward. You can't build. There has to be a foundation of fundamental truth. That life is gone. I am no longer that person. And it's not that you don't have the memories and the relationship and all of that, because you do. Widows Every widow I've ever met gets upset if someone tries to call their deceased husband their ex, because it was never a choice.
Right.
And it's a peculiar thing that people who've never been through it don't understand. Like, why are you getting mad? So I work with people to identify what are the breakdowns that are happening, and for the most part, they're in relationships, because relationships cut across everything. And when someone's grieving, they're very likely to lash out or to burst into tears, to have outsized reactions to things. And people leave in the face of them. And so being able to navigate relationships at work, personally, everywhere, learning how to establish boundaries, that's a lot of the work that I do. Because once you're doing that, you can make your way out of anything. But it really requires getting clear about what is the issue. So when I went for a 1.5 block walk in my slippers, okay, I'm not able to remember my shoes when I walk out the door. I put a sign next to the door. It said wallet, keys, shoes. Because the problem was I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
And so once I faced that was the truth in that moment. Then I could solve for it. Until you know what the true issue is, you can't solve for it. And it's different for everyone, because people care about different things. Some
Yeah.
it's essential. Even if I, as the coach even, don't think it's important. For that person, if it's important, it's important. And if it's a breakdown, it needs to be solved. So I work a lot with people to figure out, okay, what's happening? What kind of issues is it causing in my life? And what's the solution?
That's great. I always like to leave our audience with a practical tool. So if you have, what is one maybe resource, a tech tip, or a mindset shift that you wish every caregiver in this journey knew about?
I wish every caregiver in this journey knew about the tip that focused attention takes less time than distracted attention and is more satisfying. I mean, that was a game changer for me. That made all the difference. I was spending hours and hours and hours, and then I didn't have to.
And for our audience, I want to just confirm that you mean focusing on one thing at a time so you can get it done quickly and fast, instead of trying to do 5 things at once and then they all take much longer, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the most important thing is love. And also for the caregiver to love themselves. Because it's very easy to hear, but I'm the one who's old, but I'm the one who's sick, but I'm the one who's, and I'd like caregivers to remember that they're the ones holding it all together. So if they fall apart, everything falls apart. They're
Yeah.
unique and important in all the world.
Yeah. We talked about briefly before we went live, about all of the changes coming to supporting caregivers, especially in our country. And, I always talk about how there's not a lot of support at the initial stage of a diagnosis, but then there's a lot of support that can be available or can be accessible once a disease progresses or once caregiving needs start adding up, right? We have options from home healthcare workers to aides to homemaker services to companion care to respite care to inpatient support, right? We have so many options when things get really rough. And then again, it all drops as soon as that person dies. And there's not a whole lot of support that's available or easily accessible for those grieving caregivers, which is specifically what you're working on doing and providing, what I strive to provide to whoever comes my way. If you could wave a magic policy wand, what systemic change would you like to see that would improve the quality of life for these family caregivers?
Cohesive plans. So healthcare at this point is so, it's so confusing and it's so difficult because you have to go to one place to get this resource. You have to go to another place to get another resource. So if it could just be like the Mayo Clinic, I need someone to help with mental health. I need someone to help with finances. I need someone to help with what are the things that any caregiver afterwards needs, and just put them together in some kind of cohesive way so that you're not having to pull one string and another string and nobody's talking to each other. And so you don't get what you need, even if you have the resource, because you need another little piece from some other place.
Yeah, yeah, that is that is a hill that I will definitely die on, and is precisely why I started Aging Together and our Caregiver Hub to offer a one-stop shop for caregivers to access resources related to finances, legal, health, mental health, self-care, community services, right? All the things so that they don't have to try to Google and throw darts in the dark because they don't know what they're looking for, right? Everything's available online, but you have to know what you're looking for. And that's really hard because of what you said. We're so siloed. There's so many different directions and different services and providers and professionals and offices, and it varies state to state or even from city to city, and it becomes extremely exhausting and confusing for those family caregivers who just want support. Before we wrap up, what is one takeaway that you hope every viewer walks away with after hearing your story today?
That I hope every listener walks away knowing that what they do is essential. What they do holds the world up. And caregivers are undervalued, underappreciated very often. And to surround themselves with people who see them, who actually know who they are and what they do, who value that. Because sometimes in the many, many, many things that caregivers do as part of their role, it's easy to forget how much it matters that they're willing to do this act of love.
Yeah. Alison, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your story with us and the audience. I'm so glad that you agreed to come on the show.
Thank you, Pooja.
For those tuning in live, thank you for joining us. I will be back with another live stream and a guest in 2 weeks. See you then.